The moment my grandson's art teacher handed me that painting of a crying woman under a willow tree, I knew my 55-year-old secret had found me. Only one person in this world could know about that willow tree where I made the hardest decision of my life in 1963. The baby girl I gave away was standing right in front of me, not knowing she was teaching her own nephew. But what she told me about her adoptive family would shatter everything I thought I knew about my sacrifice. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers around the world. The painting trembled in my hands as I stared at those familiar green eyes I hadn't seen since she was 3 hours old. My name is Margaret, and at 68 I thought all my secrets were safely buried. I had spent more than half a century building a life around one devastating choice I made when I was just 13 years old. But life has a way of bringing the past full circle, especially when you least expect it. It was a crisp October afternoon when I received the call from Lincoln Elementary School. My grandson Tommy's art teacher wanted to schedule a parent conference. Well, technically a grandparent conference, since I'd been raising Tommy for the past 2 years after my daughter Lisa passed away in a car accident. Mrs. Patterson, this is Sarah Martinez from Lincoln Elementary. I was hoping we could schedule some time to discuss Tommy's artwork. He's shown some remarkable talent, and I'd love to share his progress with you. Sarah Martinez. Such a common name, yet something about her voice made my heart flutter strangely. There was a warmth there, a gentle cadence that felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. Of course, I replied. Tommy talks about his art class constantly. You've obviously made quite an impression on him. He's a special boy, she said softly. Very intuitive for his age. Sometimes when he paints, it's like he's channeling emotions he shouldn't understand yet. Those words sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. 2 days later, I walked through the familiar halls of Lincoln Elementary. The walls were covered with children's artwork, bright splashes of color that made me smile despite my nervousness about Tommy's academic progress since Lisa's death. Room 12B had a hand-painted sign that read, Mrs. Martinez's Art Studio in cheerful rainbow letters. Through the glass window, I could see a woman arranging paintbrushes at easels. She was tall and graceful, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun. Something about the way she moved reminded me of dancing. I knocked gently on the doorframe. Mrs. Martinez? She turned around and the world stopped. Those eyes, deep green with flecks of gold around the edges, the same eyes I had stared into for 3 precious hours in a hospital room in 1963 before signing the papers that would take her away forever. But it was more than the eyes. It was the way she tilted her head slightly when she smiled, the small dimple that appeared in her left cheek, the graceful way her hands moved as she gestured. Mrs. Patterson, please come in. I'm so glad you could make it. She extended her hand, and when I took it, I felt the same delicate bones I had traced with my finger when she was just hours old. Please call me Margaret, I managed to say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Margaret, such a beautiful, classic name. She smiled, and I saw myself at 13 in that smile. Tommy talks about his Grandma Maggie all the time. You've raised a wonderful boy. Grandma Maggie. The name Lisa had given me when she was little. The name Tommy had inherited. But hearing it from Sarah's lips felt like hearing a song I'd forgotten I knew. He's had some challenges since his mother passed, I said, settling into one of the small plastic chairs beside her desk. I worry about how he's processing everything. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. Sarah moved to a portfolio on her desk and began pulling out paintings. Tommy's artwork has been quite profound lately, almost therapeutic, I'd say. She laid out 3 paintings in front of me. The first was a typical 7-year-old's work, a house with a triangle roof, stick figures of a family, a yellow sun in the corner. But the second painting made my breath catch. It was a cemetery scene, surprisingly detailed for a child's work. Headstones dotted a green hillside, and in the foreground, a small boy stood holding hands with an older woman. Above them, a ghostly figure of a young woman seemed to be watching over them both. "This is how he sees his current situation," Sarah explained gently. "He knows his mother is gone, but he feels safe with you. The detail in this painting is remarkable for his age group." I nodded, unable to speak. The third painting she placed before me made my heart stop completely. It showed a woman crying under a large willow tree. The woman wore a blue dress and held her arms as if cradling something precious. In the background, barely visible, was the outline of a small building with cross on top. My hands started shaking. I knew that willow tree. I knew that blue dress. I knew that small building. It was St. Mary's Home for Unwed Mothers, where I had spent the final 3 months of my pregnancy in 1963. Where I had sat under that ancient willow tree every day, talking to the baby in my womb, apologizing for what I was about to do. "Where did he get the inspiration for this one?" I whispered. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "That's what's so interesting. When I asked him about it, he said he dreamed about it. He said the sad lady in the painting was singing a lullaby about stars and moonbeams." She paused. "Do you know that lullaby by any chance?" Stars and moonbeams. The song my own mother had sung to me, the song I had hummed to my unborn daughter during those long nights at St. Mary's. "I might," I said carefully. "It's strange," Sarah continued, "because Tommy mentioned that the lady in his dream had green eyes, just like mine, and just like his, actually. Isn't genetics fascinating?" The room began to spin slightly. I gripped the edge of the desk. "Are you all right, Margaret? You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just, it's warm in here." Sarah immediately went to open a window. As she moved, I noticed something that made my heart race even faster. On a chain around her neck, barely visible beneath her blouse, was a small silver locket. I knew that locket. It had belonged to my mother, and to her mother before that. I had worn it throughout my pregnancy, and in a moment of desperate love, I had placed it around my newborn daughter's neck before the nurses took her away. When Sarah turned back to me, I made a decision that would change everything. "Sarah," I said quietly, "can you tell me about your family, your parents?" Her face lit up. "Oh, I had wonderful parents. Jim and Carol Martinez adopted me when I was just days old. They couldn't have children of their own, and they said I was their miracle baby." "That's beautiful," I said, though my voice was barely above a whisper. "They were amazing. Dad was a music teacher, and Mom was a nurse. They encouraged my art from the very beginning." Her smile faltered slightly. "They both passed away a few years ago, within months of each other. Sometimes I wonder about my birth mother, though." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "What do you wonder about?" "Well, the adoption records were sealed, of course. But the social worker told my parents that my birth mother was very young, just a teenager. She said the decision to give me up was incredibly difficult for her." Sarah touched the locket at her throat unconsciously. "I have this locket that came with me. It's the only thing I have from her. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me, if she regrets her decision." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I couldn't stop them. "Margaret, what's wrong? Did I say something to upset you?" I looked at this beautiful woman, this talented teacher, who had grown up, loved, and cherished, who was now unknowingly caring for her own nephew. The child I had agonized over for 55 years had become everything I had hoped she would be. "Sarah," I whispered, "what was the date of your adoption?" She looked puzzled, but answered, "June 15th, 1963. Why do you ask?" June 15th, 1963. The day I signed the papers. The day I walked out of St. Mary's with empty arms and a broken heart, telling myself I had done the right thing. "The locket," I said, my voice shaking. "May I see it?" Sarah seemed confused, but lifted the chain over her head and handed it to me. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside, faded but still visible, was a tiny photograph of my mother holding me as a baby. On the opposite side, in my mother's careful script, were the initials MEP, Margaret Elizabeth Patterson. "How did you know?" Sarah whispered, her face going white as she understood what she was seeing. I looked up at her through my tears. Because I'm the one who put it around your neck 3 hours after you were born. The silence in that classroom was deafening. Sarah sank into her chair, staring at me as if she were seeing a ghost. She started, then stopped. I'm your birth mother, I said softly, and Tommy is your nephew. The implications of this hit us both simultaneously. Sarah had been caring for her own brother's child, loving him, nurturing his artistic gifts, without knowing they shared the same blood. My God, she breathed. Tommy has my eyes because we're family. I nodded, unable to speak. And Lisa was your half-sister, I finished. I married Tommy's grandfather 5 years after you were born. Lisa never knew about you. I never told anyone. Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing this revelation. Finally, she looked up at me with those familiar green eyes. Why? She asked simply. Why did you give me away? It was the question I had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously for 55 years. I was 13 years old, I began, my voice barely a whisper. 13, pregnant, and terrified. My parents were devastated. In 1963, there weren't options for girls like me. You either got married, went away to have the baby and gave it up, or, I trailed off. Or what? Or you found someone to help you end the pregnancy. That was dangerous and illegal, but some girls tried it anyway. Sarah's eyes widened. I couldn't do that, I continued. I felt you moving inside me, heard your heartbeat at the doctor's office. You were real, you were alive, and you were mine. But I was also a child myself. I couldn't provide for you, couldn't give you the life you deserved. The tears were flowing freely now, 55 years of suppressed grief pouring out. I spent 3 months at St. Mary's, sitting under that willow tree every day, talking to you, singing to you, loving you. I knew I would only have a few hours with you after you were born, so I tried to love you enough in those 3 months to last a lifetime. Sarah was crying now, too. The day you were born was the most beautiful and most devastating day of my life. You were perfect, absolutely perfect. You had these tiny fingernails and the softest hair, and when you looked at me, I stopped, overwhelmed by the memory. What happened then? I held you for 3 hours. I sang you the star and moonbeams lullaby. I put my mother's locket around your neck, hoping someday it would bring you back to me. And then my voice broke completely. Then you signed the papers. Then I signed the papers, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Finally, Sarah spoke. Do you regret it? I looked at her, really looked at her. This accomplished, loving woman who had overcome the circumstances of her birth to become someone who nurtured children, who saw the beauty in a grieving 7-year-old's artwork, who had unknowingly been caring for her own family. Regret giving you to people who could love you properly? Never. Regret not being able to keep you myself? Every single day for 55 years. Something shifted in Sarah's expression. The shock was giving way to something else. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance. Tell me about my father, she said quietly. I took a deep breath. This was the other secret I had carried alone. He was 15, a boy from my neighborhood named Michael. He was as scared as I was when we found out. His family moved away that summer, and I never saw him again. I don't think he ever knew what happened to you. Do you know where he is now? I have no idea. I was too ashamed to ever look for him. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. My adoptive parents used to tell me that my birth parents were probably young and scared, and that they loved me enough to want better for me than they could provide. I always hoped that was true. It was true, I said firmly. Every word of it. She reached across the desk and took my hand, the same hand that had held hers when she was just hours old. What do we do now? She asked. It was a good question. What do you do when you discover that fate has been slowly weaving your family back together without your knowledge? When you realize that the grandson you've been raising has been receiving love and guidance from his aunt, who didn't know she was his aunt. I don't know, I admitted. This is all so overwhelming. Does Tommy know? About me, I mean. I shook my head. I never told Lisa about you, so she never told Tommy. As far as he knows, you're just his favorite teacher. Sarah smiled through her tears. He is pretty special to me. I always felt drawn to him, from his first day in my class. There was something about him that reminded me of myself as a child. You were both artistic, even as babies, I told her. You used to trace patterns in the air with your tiny fingers. Really? Really. And you had the most expressive face, like you were already trying to communicate something important. Sarah laughed, a sound that was achingly familiar. Margaret, she said carefully, would you like to have dinner sometime? I mean, I know this is all very sudden and strange, but I'd like to know more about you, about our family. Our family. The words I never thought I'd hear her say. I would love that, I said, more than anything. And maybe, she continued, we could figure out together how to tell Tommy that his art teacher is also his aunt. I imagined Tommy's reaction to learning that Mrs. Martinez, the teacher who understood his paintings and encouraged his creativity, was actually family. He would be thrilled. He's going to be over the moon, I said. I hope so. I've grown quite fond of him. And he adores you. He talks about your class every day after school. We made plans to meet for dinner that weekend. As I gathered my purse to leave, Sarah stopped me. Margaret, thank you. For what? For making the hardest choice possible so that I could have the best life possible. I know it must have been agony for you, but Jim and Carol Martinez were wonderful parents. They loved me completely, encouraged my dreams, and raised me to be the person I am today. I felt a weight I had carried for 55 years begin to lift from my shoulders. And thank you, I said, for becoming the kind of person I always hoped you would become. For being someone who sees the beauty in children's art, who helps little boys process their grief through creativity, who loves without knowing why. As I walked out of Lincoln Elementary that day, I realized that my story wasn't ending, it was beginning a new chapter. The baby I had given away had grown into a woman who was already caring for her own nephew. The choice I made in 1963 had led to this moment in 2023, when 3 generations of our family could finally be whole. That evening, as Tommy showed me his latest painting, a picture of himself, me, and Mrs. Martinez standing together under a rainbow, I realized he had somehow known before any of us did. Children have an intuition about love and family that adults often lose. Grandma Maggie, he said as I tucked him into bed, Mrs. Martinez feels like family, doesn't she? Yes, sweetheart, I said, kissing his forehead. She really does. But I knew we still had a difficult conversation ahead of us. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his favorite teacher is actually his aunt? How do you tell him about a sister he never knew his mother had? The weekend came faster than I expected. Sarah and I had agreed to meet at Giovanni's, a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. I arrived early, my hands shaking, as I sat at our reserved table. Part of me still couldn't believe this was real. When Sarah walked in, I was struck again by how much she resembled me at her age. She had the same purposeful walk, the same way of scanning a room before settling in. But there was a confidence about her that I had never possessed at 38. Her adoptive parents had clearly given her something I couldn't have, the security of being truly wanted. I've been thinking about our conversation all week, she said as she sat down. I have so many questions. Ask me anything, I said, though my voice betrayed my nervousness. Tell me about Lisa, about my half-sister. I smiled sadly. Lisa was born 5 years after you. She was planned and wanted and celebrated. Everything I couldn't give you, I was able to give her. I paused, but in some ways that made it harder. Every milestone with Lisa reminded me of what I had missed with you. What was she like? She was fierce and independent, like you seemed to be. She was going to be a veterinarian before she got pregnant with Tommy. She loved animals, especially horses. She would have loved knowing she had an artistic sister. Sarah's eyes glistened. I always wanted a sister. You had one. You just didn't know it. We ordered our dinner, but neither of us seemed very interested in eating. We were too busy trying to piece together 55 years of separate lives. Tell me about your adoptive parents, I said. What were they like? Sarah's face lit up. They were wonderful. Dad taught music at the high school, and Mom worked at the children's hospital. They were older when they adopted me. They'd been trying to have children for 10 years. Did they tell you that you were adopted right away? As soon as I was old enough to understand. They said I was chosen, that out of all the babies in the world, I was the one they picked. It made me feel special. I felt a stab of something, not jealousy exactly, but a complex mix of gratitude and loss. They encouraged my art from the beginning, Sarah continued. Dad would play piano while I painted. Mom would frame every single picture I made and hang them around the house. When I decided to become an art teacher, they were my biggest supporters. They sound like exactly the kind of parents I hoped you would have, I said sincerely. They were. But Margaret, I need you to know something. Learning about you doesn't diminish what I felt for them. They were my parents in every way that mattered. I know, I said quickly, and I wouldn't want it any other way. That's exactly why I made the choice I made. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, but I also need you to know that there was always a piece missing. I always wondered about you, about what you looked like, whether you thought about me, whether I had your eyes or your laugh or your love of art. You have all of those things, I whispered, and so much more. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice growing serious. Something I discovered after my parents died that I need to tell you about. My heart skipped. What is it? When I was going through their papers, I found letters from the adoption agency, but also letters from you. The world tilted. Letters from me? You wrote to them. For years. The adoption agency forwarded them to my parents, but they never showed them to me while I was growing up. I felt dizzy. I wrote letters? Dozens of them. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, letters about what I might be doing at different ages. You wrote about hoping I was happy, about wondering if I liked to draw, about missing me every day but being glad I had a good family. Tears were streaming down my face. I had written those letters in the first few years after the adoption, desperate to maintain some connection to my lost daughter. I had sent them to the adoption agency, not knowing if they would ever reach her or her parents. My parents kept every single one, Sarah said softly. They're in a box in my closet now. They were going to give them to me when I turned 18, but they said I seemed so content with our family that they didn't want to create confusion or sadness. Do you still have them? I do. And Margaret, they're beautiful. They showed me a mother who loved her daughter desperately, but put that daughter's needs above her own pain. They showed me someone who thought about me every day, but respected the choice she had made. I was sobbing now, years of suppressed grief pouring out. Would you like to read them again? Sarah asked gently. I don't remember what I wrote, I admitted. You wrote about your life, about going back to school, about meeting Tommy's grandfather. You wrote about Lisa being born, and how you hoped someday I might meet her. In one letter, when I would have been about 5, you wrote about seeing a little girl in a grocery store who looked like I might look, and how it took everything you had not to follow her home. I remember that day, I whispered. You wrote about getting married and being happy, but still having a Sarah-shaped hole in your heart. You wrote about hoping that wherever I was, I felt loved and special, and that my parents were proud of me. They were, weren't they? Proud of you. Every day of my life. Dad came to every art show I ever had, even in elementary school. Mom kept a scrapbook of every award, every newspaper mention, every student thank you note I ever received. Good, I said fiercely. That's exactly what you deserved. There's one more thing, Sarah said. In your last letter, when I would have been about 10, you wrote that you were going to stop writing because you didn't want to interfere in my life anymore. But you said you hoped that someday, if I wanted to find you, I would be able to. I never thought you would want to, I admitted. I thought about it, especially after Mom and Dad died. But I didn't know how to start looking, and I was scared of what I might find. What if you regretted having me? What if you were angry that I had disrupted your life? What if you had a whole other family and didn't want reminders of your past? Never, I said firmly. Not for one single day did I regret bringing you into this world. Sarah smiled through her tears. I know that now. The letters proved it. But finding you this way, through Tommy, feels like it was meant to be. Maybe it was, I said. Maybe this is how it was supposed to happen. We talked for 3 hours that night. Sarah told me about her college years, her brief marriage that had ended amicably when they realized they wanted different things, her decision to focus on teaching instead of having children of her own. I always felt like I was meant to nurture other people's children, she said. Now I understand why. I was preparing to help raise Tommy without knowing he was my nephew. I told her about my marriage to Robert, Tommy's grandfather, and how he had supported my decision to keep my first pregnancy secret. I told her about Lisa's childhood, her dreams, her death, and how Tommy had become my purpose. He's so much like you were as a child, I said. Sensitive, artistic, intuitive about people's feelings. Does he know about his mother's death? Really understand it? As much as a 7-year-old can. He knows she's not coming back, and he knows I love him and will take care of him. But he still has nightmares sometimes. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That explains some of his artwork. He's processing grief in the only way he knows how. You've been helping him more than you know. Those art sessions are therapeutic for him. I'd like to do more if you're comfortable with that. I'd like to be part of his life, part of both your lives if you'll have me. Sarah, I said, you've been part of our lives all along. We just didn't know it. By the time we left the restaurant, we had made plans for Sarah to come to Sunday dinner the following week. We had decided to tell Tommy the truth together, in a way that would feel like gaining family rather than learning about secrets. But as we walked to our cars, Sarah stopped suddenly. Margaret, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. My heart clenched. What is it? The adoption agency kept more than just your letters. They kept medical records. My father? When I was going through my parents' papers, I found a file with information about both sides of my biological family. There are things you might want to know, things that might affect Tommy's health as he grows up. What kind of things? Heart conditions on your father's side, diabetes on your mother's side, things that would be important for you and Tommy to know about. I hadn't thought about the medical implications of our reunion. In 1963, such records weren't always kept or shared. But there's something else, Sarah continued. The file had an address for your father, from 1963, but still an address. And Margaret, he's still alive. My knees nearly buckled. My father, who had disowned me when I got pregnant, who had refused to speak to me after I came home from St. Mary's, who had died in my mind years ago, was still alive. Where is he? About 2 hours from here. He's 89 years old, in a nursing home called Sunset Manor. I leaned against my car, overwhelmed. In 1 week, I had found my daughter and learned that my estranged father was still alive. Do you want to see him? Sarah asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. He hasn't spoken to me in 55 years. He made it clear that I was no longer his daughter when I brought shame to the family. People change, Margaret, especially when they face their own mortality. Maybe, I said, but I'm not sure I'm ready for another reunion just yet. Think about it, Sarah said, and if you decide you want to go, I'll go with you. He's Tommy's great-grandfather and my grandfather. Maybe it's time to heal that wound, too. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. In the span of a week, my quiet life had been turned upside down. I had found my daughter, learned about my father, and discovered that my grandson had been receiving love from his biological aunt without any of us knowing it. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. I needed time to process everything, to figure out how to move forward. Tommy found me sitting in the garden, staring at nothing. "Grandma Maggie, are you sad?" he asked, climbing into my lap. "Not sad, sweetheart, just thinking." "About what?" I looked down at this precious boy who had become my world after Lisa died. How could I explain that his family was about to get bigger? "Tommy, how would you feel if Mrs. Martinez came to have dinner with us sometime?" His face lit up. "Really? That would be awesome. Can she bring her paints?" "Maybe. Would you like that?" "Yes. She could teach you how to paint too, Grandma. You always say you're not artistic, but I bet she could help you." Out of the mouths of babes. Tommy was already planning ways to bring us together, not knowing we had already found each other. "There's something else, sweetheart, something important I need to tell you about Mrs. Martinez." "What?" I took a deep breath. "She's your aunt." Tommy looked confused, but Mommy didn't have a sister. "She did, a sister she never knew about. Mrs. Martinez is your mommy's sister, which makes her your aunt." Tommy's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really. So Mrs. Martinez is family?" "Yes, she is." Tommy thought about this for a moment, then smiled the biggest smile I had seen from him since Lisa died. "That means she has to love me forever now, right? Because that's what families do?" "That's exactly what families do," I said, hugging him tight. "Can I call her Aunt Sarah?" "If she says it's okay." "This is the best news ever," Tommy exclaimed, jumping up from my lap. "Wait until I tell her at school tomorrow." "Actually, sweetheart, let's wait until she comes to dinner this weekend. We can tell her together." That Sunday, Sarah arrived at our house carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and a small wrapped package. She looked nervous but determined. "These are for you," she said, handing me the flowers. "And this," she gave the package to Tommy, "is for my nephew." Tommy tore open the wrapping paper to reveal a set of professional-grade colored pencils and a sketchbook. "Wow, these are just like the ones in your classroom." "They are exactly like the ones in my classroom, because now you're not just my student, you're my family." Tommy looked up at her with shining eyes. "Can I really call you Aunt Sarah?" "I would love that more than anything," she said, kneeling down to his level. Tommy threw his arms around her neck, and I saw Sarah close her eyes, savoring the moment. Over dinner, we told Tommy the story of how Aunt Sarah came to be his aunt. We kept it simple and age-appropriate, focusing on love and family rather than the painful details of my teenage pregnancy. Tommy listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions like, "So Mommy had a secret sister? And is that why Aunt Sarah is so good at art, like Mommy was good with animals?" After dinner, Sarah pulled out a photo album she had brought. It was full of pictures from her childhood and young adulthood, photos her parents had taken of birthdays, graduations, art shows, and everyday moments. "These are pictures of me growing up," she told Tommy. "Want to see what your aunt looked like when she was little?" As we flipped through the pages, I was amazed by how normal and happy Sarah's childhood had looked. Birthday parties with friends, family vacations, school events, all the things I had hoped she would have. But what struck me most was a photo of Sarah at age 7, holding up a painting she had made. She looked exactly like Tommy did when he was proud of his artwork. "You look just like Tommy in this picture," I said. Sarah smiled. "I was thinking the same thing. I guess artistic talent really does run in families." As the evening wound down, Tommy curled up between Sarah and me on the couch, looking through his new sketchbook. "Grandma Maggie," he said sleepily, "now that I have Aunt Sarah, our family is getting bigger, isn't it?" "Yes, sweetheart, it is." "Good. I like bigger families." After Tommy went to bed, Sarah and I talked quietly in the living room. "He's an amazing little boy," she said. "You've done such a good job with him." "Lisa did most of the work. I'm just trying to continue what she started. Don't sell yourself short. He's confident and loving and curious about the world. Those are qualities you've nurtured in him." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us adjusting to this new reality. "Margaret," Sarah said eventually, "have you thought any more about your father?" I had been thinking about it constantly, but I hadn't reached any conclusions. "I'm scared," I admitted. "What if he still hates me? What if seeing me brings back all his anger and disappointment? What if it doesn't? What if he spent the last 55 years regretting his reaction? What if he's been hoping for a chance to make things right? I don't know if I can handle another rejection." "You won't be facing it alone. I meant what I said about going with you. Why would you want to meet him? He rejected both of us." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Because he's part of our story. Because Tommy deserves to know his great-grandfather if possible. And because sometimes healing old wounds is worth the risk." I thought about Tommy, about how easily he had accepted Sarah into our family. Children are so much braver than adults when it comes to love. "Maybe you're right," I said finally. "Maybe it's time. We don't have to decide tonight. But Margaret, think about this. What if he dies without ever knowing he has a great-grandson? What if he dies without ever knowing that the granddaughter he never met became a teacher who loves children? What if he dies thinking the worst about what happened in 1963? Those questions haunted me that night, and all the next week. Finally, the following Friday, I called Sarah. "I want to go see him," I said without preamble. "When?" "Tomorrow, before I lose my nerve." "I'll pick you up at 9. That night, I told Tommy where we were going. "You have a great-grandpa you've never met?" he asked, amazed. "Yes. He's very old, and he lives far away, and we haven't talked in a very long time." "Why not?" "How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes adults make mistakes they're too proud to fix?" "Because we had a disagreement a long time ago, and neither of us knew how to say we were sorry." "But now you're going to say you're sorry?" "I'm going to try." "Good. Saying sorry is important. That's what Mommy used to tell me." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. The next morning, Sarah and I made the 2-hour drive to Sunset Manor in relative silence. We were both nervous, unsure of what we would find. Sunset Manor was a pleasant-looking facility with well-maintained grounds and cheerful staff. The receptionist confirmed that my father, Harold Patterson, was indeed a resident, though she warned us that his memory wasn't what it used to be. "Some days are better than others," she explained. "Today seems to be one of his good days." We found him in the garden, sitting alone on a bench, staring at a fountain. At 89, he was smaller and more frail than I remembered, but I recognized his profile immediately. "Dad?" I said softly. He turned toward us, and I saw his eyes, my eyes, Sarah's eyes, Tommy's eyes, widen in recognition. "Margaret?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Dad, it's me." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, 55 years of silence stretching between us. "I thought you were dead," he said finally. "I thought you wanted me to be." He winced. "I said things, terrible things. I was so angry, so ashamed. I thought the neighbors would never stop talking, that our family name was ruined forever." "Dad, this is Sarah," I said, gently guiding her forward, "your granddaughter." My father's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her features, her resemblance to our family. "The baby," he breathed. "The baby," I confirmed. "My God, she's beautiful. She looks like your mother did at that age." Sarah smiled tentatively. "Hello, Grandpa." The word hung in the air between them. My father began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from 55 years of regret. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I was wrong. I was so wrong." I sat down beside him on the bench and for the first time since 1963 put my arms around my father. "I'm sorry too, Dad. I should have tried to contact you years ago." "I heard about Robert's death," he said quietly. "I wanted to come to the funeral, but I didn't think I'd be welcome." "You would have been welcome. You always would have been welcome." We talked for 2 hours that day. My father told us about his life, about my mother's death 10 years earlier, about his regrets and mistakes. He told Sarah how proud he was of what she had become, how sorry he was that he had missed her entire life. Most importantly, he asked about Tommy. "I have a great-grandson," he said, his face lighting up. "His name is Tommy, and he's 7 years old, and he's an artist like Sarah." "Bring him to see me," my father said urgently. "Please, bring him to see me. I don't have much time left, and I want to meet him." As we prepared to leave that day, my father took my hand. "Margaret, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance you could forgive a foolish old man?" "Dad, I forgave you years ago. I just didn't know how to tell you." He squeezed my hand tightly. "Your mother would have been so proud of both of you. Sarah for becoming such a fine woman despite everything, and you for making the hardest choice a mother can make." The next weekend, I brought Tommy to meet his great-grandfather. Watching the 4 generations of our family together, my father, me, Sarah, and Tommy, I realized that sometimes healing takes longer than one lifetime, but it's never too late to begin. My father died peacefully 6 months later, surrounded by his newfound family. At his funeral, Tommy stood up and, without prompting, sang the Star and Moonbeams lullaby that had been passed down through our family for generations. Today, Sarah is still Tommy's art teacher, but she's also his aunt, his mentor, and his friend. She comes to our house for Sunday dinner every week, and Tommy spends some weekends at her apartment, where she's teaching him advanced painting techniques. But our story didn't end with my father's funeral. Life, as I've learned, has a way of continuing to surprise you, even when you think you've experienced all the miracles one lifetime can hold. It was about a year after we had all been reunited, when Sarah came to Sunday dinner with an unusual request. "I've been thinking about something," she said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "About Michael." "Michael?" I asked, though my heart already knew who she meant. "My birth father. I know you said you lost touch with him after 1963, but I've been wondering, do you think we could try to find him?" I paused, a plate halfway to the sink. "Sarah, that was almost 60 years ago. He could be anywhere. He could be married with a family who doesn't know about you. He could be dead," she finished gently. "I know, but what if he isn't? What if he's wondered about me all these years, the same way you did?" Tommy looked up from his coloring book at the kitchen table. "Who's Michael?" Sarah and I exchanged glances. We had told Tommy about the reunion with his great-grandfather, but we hadn't yet discussed the complexities of his aunt's paternity. "Michael is someone your Aunt Sarah is curious about," I said carefully. "Is he family too?" "In a way, yes," Sarah answered. "He's part of my story, which makes him part of our family's story." That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Sarah and I sat in my living room with my old photo albums and high school yearbooks. "Tell me everything you remember about him," Sarah said. I opened my 1962 yearbook and found Michael's picture. Even after all these years, seeing his face brought back a flood of memories. "Michael Chen," I said, running my finger over the black and white photograph. "He was a sophomore when I was an 8th grader. He lived 3 blocks away, and we rode the same bus to school." "Chen?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. "He was Asian?" I nodded. "His parents had immigrated from Taiwan when he was little. He was incredibly smart, honor roll every semester, and he was kind. That's what I remember most about him. He was kind to everyone, even the younger kids like me." How did it happen?" I closed my eyes, remembering those innocent days when the consequences of our actions seemed impossibly far away. There was a school dance in the spring of 1962. Michael asked me to go with him, which was incredibly brave of him. Interracial relationships weren't exactly accepted in our town back then. My parents were furious when they found out. "They didn't let you go?" "They forbade it, but I snuck out anyway." We met at the school and danced for about an hour before my father showed up and dragged me home. I smiled sadly at the memory. It was the most romantic hour of my 13-year-old life. "And then?" My parents grounded me for the rest of the school year, but Michael would walk by our house every day on his way home from school, just to see if I was okay. Sometimes he would leave notes in our mailbox when my parents weren't looking. Sarah was listening intently, and I could see her trying to picture these two children who would become her parents. One day in late summer, my parents went to visit my aunt for the weekend and took my little brother with them. I was supposed to stay with our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, but she got called away to help with her own sick mother. I was alone in the house for the first time in months. And Michael came to see you. He did. He had heard about my parents being away from my brother, I think. He came to the back door around sunset, carrying a bouquet of wild flowers he had picked. I paused, remembering that golden evening. We sat on the back porch and talked for hours. About school, about our dreams, about how unfair our parents were being. And that's when... We were just kids, Sarah. We didn't really understand what we were doing or what the consequences could be. We thought we loved each other, and in our childish way, maybe we did. It only happened once. What happened when you realized you were pregnant? I was terrified. I didn't tell anyone for almost 3 months. When I finally couldn't hide it anymore, my parents were devastated. They demanded to know who the father was. Did you tell them? I had to. They said they needed to contact his parents, to make arrangements. I made air quotes around the words. But when they went to the Chen's house, they discovered that the family had moved away over the summer. Michael's father had gotten a job offer in California, and they had left without telling anyone in the neighborhood. So Michael never knew. Michael never knew. By the time I realized I was pregnant, he was already gone. I had no way to contact him, no way to even let him know what had happened. Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing this information. "Do you think he would have wanted to know?" she asked finally. "I've wondered about that for 55 years, I admitted. Part of me thinks he would have wanted to do the right thing, maybe even wanted to keep you. But we were so young, Sarah. We were children ourselves. I'm not sure it would have changed anything. But you think he might have wondered over the years? If he's anything like the boy I knew, yes. Michael was responsible, caring. I think the not knowing would have haunted him." The next week, Sarah began her search. She started with online databases, social media, and genealogy websites. The internet had made finding people so much easier than it had been even 10 years earlier. It took her 3 weeks to find him. "His name is Michael Chen Rodriguez now," she told me over the phone, her voice breathless with excitement. "He's 70 years old. He's a retired engineer, and he lives in Portland, Oregon. He's been married for 40 years to a woman named Carmen, and they have 2 sons together." My heart was racing. "Did you contact him?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Margaret, he has a website for his consulting business, and there's a photo of him. He looks like Tommy." He looks like Tommy? The eyes, the shape of his face. Tommy definitely got some of his features from the Chen side of the family. That evening, Sarah came over with her laptop and showed me Michael's website. She was right. Even at 70, I could see traces of the 15-year-old boy I had known, and the resemblance to Tommy was unmistakable. "There's something else," Sarah said, clicking to another page. "Look at this." It was a blog post Michael had written about his volunteer work with a local youth center. The title was "Second Chances and the Kids Who Need Them." He works with teenagers in difficult situations, Sarah explained. Kids who are pregnant, kids who have been kicked out of their homes, kids who are facing the same kinds of choices we faced in 1963. I read the blog post with tears in my eyes. Michael had clearly never forgotten what it felt like to be a young person with limited options and adult responsibilities. "Do you think that's a coincidence?" Sarah asked. "I don't think anything about our story has been a coincidence," I replied. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm going to email him." "Are you sure? I've spent my whole life wondering about half of my heritage, and if he's spending his retirement helping kids who are in situations similar to what we were in, then maybe he's been wondering too." The email was simple and direct. "Dear Mr. Chen Rodriguez, My name is Sarah Martinez, and I believe you may be my biological father. I was born on June 15, 1963, in Columbus, Ohio. My birth mother's name is Margaret Patterson. I understand that you may not remember her, as you were both very young at the time, but I am hoping you might be willing to speak with me. I want you to know that I had a wonderful childhood with loving adoptive parents, and I am not looking for anything other than the chance to connect with my biological family. If you would prefer not to have contact, I will completely understand and respect your wishes. Sincerely, Sarah Martinez. She sent the email on a Tuesday evening. By Thursday morning, she had a response. Dear Sarah, I have thought about you every day for almost 60 years.
When can we talk?
Michael! The phone call happened that weekend, with Sarah on speakerphone in my living room so I could participate. Hearing Michael's voice again after almost 6 decades was surreal. Margaret, he said when Sarah told him I was there. Is it really you? Hello, Michael, I said, my voice barely steady. I can't believe this is happening. I've imagined this conversation so many times over the years. You have? When my family moved to California, I tried to call you, but your number had been changed. I wrote letters, but they all came back unopened. I thought maybe your family had moved too. My parents intercepted your letters, I admitted. I never knew you had tried to contact me. There was a long silence on the line. I would have come back, he said finally. If I had known about the baby, I would have found a way to come back. Even if our parents had forbidden it, even if we were too young, I would have tried to do the right thing. I know you would have, I said. That's the kind of person you were. I've wondered about you both every day since. Whether the baby was a boy or a girl, whether you were okay, whether you were able to finish school, whether you were happy. Sarah found her voice then. I was happy, she said. I had wonderful parents who loved me completely, and I became an art teacher, and I love working with children. An art teacher, Michael repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. That's perfect. You always were artistic, even as a little kid. You remember me as a little kid? I remember your mother being artistic, he corrected gently. She was always drawing in the margins of her notebooks. I assumed you might have inherited that. We talked for 2 hours that day. Michael told us about his life, his move to California, his education, his marriage to Carmen, his 2 sons who are now adults with children of their own. Does your family know about me? Sarah asked. Carmen knows. I told her about you early in our relationship. She's always said that if you ever wanted to find us, we would welcome you with open arms. As for my sons, they know they have a half-sister somewhere in the world. They've always hoped to meet you someday. 3 months later, Sarah and I flew to Portland with Tommy to meet Michael and his family. It was awkward at first. 60 years is a long time to bridge, but children have a way of breaking down barriers that adults struggle with. Tommy was fascinated by his grandfather's stories about Taiwan and his grandmother Carmen's stories about Mexico. He came home with a head full of new cultural traditions and a burning desire to learn Mandarin. I have the most international family in my whole class, he announced proudly when we returned home. Michael and Carmen visited us 6 months later, and it was during that visit that Michael gave Sarah something that completed another circle in our family's story. I kept this all these years, he said, pulling out a small wooden box. I don't know why. Maybe I always hoped I would have a chance to give it to someone who would understand its significance. Inside the box was a simple silver bracelet. I bought this for your mother for Christmas in 1962, he explained to Sarah. I was going to give it to her when I got back from California, but then life took us in different directions. Sarah put the bracelet on her wrist, where it looked perfect next to the locket that had come from my side of the family. Now I have something from both my birth parents, she said, tears in her eyes. That Christmas was the first time our entire extended family celebrated together. Michael and Carmen, Sarah, Tommy, and myself, along with Sarah's in-laws who had driven up from Arizona. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. As I watched Tommy learn Christmas carols in 3 different languages and saw Sarah teaching Carmen how to make my mother's apple pie while Michael shared engineering stories with Tommy, I realized that sometimes families don't just reunite, they expand and evolve and become something entirely new. At 69, I thought I knew what family meant. But I've learned that family isn't just about blood or adoption papers or shared DNA. It's about the people who choose to love you, who show up for Sunday dinners, who teach your grandson new languages, who keep silver bracelets for 60 years just in case. Sometimes the children we give away come back to us in ways we never could have imagined. Sometimes love finds a way to complete the circle, even after more than half a century. And sometimes when you're brave enough to search for missing pieces, you discover that your family was always bigger than you knew. It was just scattered across time and geography, waiting for the right moment to come together. At 68, I thought my life was winding down, that all the important chapters had been written. Instead, I discovered that some of the most beautiful chapters are the ones that begin with the words, "I never expected this to happen." My second spring wasn't just about finding new love. It was about discovering that the love I thought I had lost was simply waiting, growing and multiplying across generations, ready to bloom again when the season was right.